is that we're not a chapter of the Black Panthers, but we are in solidarity with them. You know, we're right behind them, and there's groups like ours all around the world. It's a global intercommunalism is the term that Huey P. Newton used, and which Will was really strong about. That's what he really tried to teach us, was what intercommunalism could do, rather than this capitalist kind of hierarchical world that we live in. We were the first New Zealand-born generation of the first wave of Samoan migrants that came to New Zealand in large numbers. So we had no role models. There was no one around who was like us. I mean, we understood Samoan and Tongan, but we couldn't speak it, right? But we didn't need to in New Zealand because you needed English to survive. But that's the cost that that we paid as the first of the first. And so we, well, what my identity work has pointed out is that we are New Zealand-born Samoans. And that's a valid identity. And I feel sorry for our young kids who think they have to look up in a book or ask their grandparents what their culture is, because we have a valid experience of their culture.
I think just to support what Melani was saying was that we really hammered out who we were during those critical years of the Polynesian Panthers. We had social scientists, we had history telling us who we were, colonial history telling us who we were, and our parents had expectations about who we were going to be as well. And when we didn't conform to any of those expectations or any of those categories of interpretation, we really struggled ourselves to find out who we really are. And it wasn't until much later, after the Panthers, that we started to appreciate that we are neither Samoan or Tongan or Niuean or Cook Island, and nor are we Kiwis. But we are New Zealand-born Pacific people from whichever island we are. We still uphold the values and the traditions of our forebears. We understand them better, actually, because we're moving in and between two cultures, two value systems. And so these were things that they didn't come to us easily at all. We struggled with this every step of the way to finding out who we are, until finally we're able to say, I'm a New Zealand-born Samoan or a New Zealand-born Tongan.
But it wasn't easy, and that was some of the pain and some of the anger came from when we were being political. Our parents could not understand why we were being political.
Why?
I mean, I came from a good church girl background. You know, all I knew was school, family, church. School, family, church. That was my world. And so it was hard for us to try and explain to our parents what we were doing politically. So, I mean, I had to sneak out, you know. When my dad asked me where I'd be going, I'd say, I'm going to a youth meeting, Dad. But, you know, it was hard to have to do that and to be part of a group which was making change for our community and family. So it was, you know, as Alec will agree, you know, they just looked at us as black sheep. We became black sheep, really, of our families. We, people laughed at us, called us, you know, moipi, you know, what do you know, don't be cheeky, you know, because our parents had so much respect for authority. You know, they just believed Bailangi over us kids in terms of what we're doing, and they would never understand. But Pauline, just getting back to why Will went back to Tonga. He was in court trying to face charges about rioting at the Springbok tour. you know, the Springbok rugby game at at Eden Park. So there were a group of them who were waiting for their trial, and some of the protest groups got Bishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa to come and be a witness for these so-called rioters. And so he went to the court and he said, "Judge, Your Honour, these guys are not criminals. They are freedom fighters." And so they got off. But as Will was walking out of that courtroom, the cops, you know, touched him on the shoulder and said, "We're going to get you, Ilola, here. We're going to get you." So he knew he had to take off to Tonga because they were going to pin something on him.
You know, we were, just because we had the name Panthers, we were already people of interest to the police. And very often we had our offices burgled and nothing taken but our files interfered with and our safe. And so everywhere we went in our hood, we were the Panthers that were known to the police. They were always under police watch. And this is the reason, or part of the reason, why Willie Norahia exiled himself to Tonga, because it could be any little thing, spitting on the pavement, behaving in what they might define as a disorderly manner, could have been arrested. Very minor offences. Yes. So that was the feeling of the environment at the time, if you were a Panther. So he did what he thought was best for him and his family, and he took off to Tonga, stayed there for, was it 11 years?
Almost 11 years. He only came back when Mandela came, when Nelson Mandela came back to thank us, the Panthers and the other groups that were involved with the Springbok protests. And the story goes like this. He was in a cell, you know, solitary confinement, and he heard the guards laughing outside the door, and they were laughing about these silly people down at the bottom of the world who were protesting against apartheid. And he said he felt that the sun had come out when he heard that this little country way back there was, you know, protesting. And so he came back to thank everyone. And that was the time too when, I don't know if you know about Tigi Ness, the muso who's a Panther, yeah. He spent 9 months in Mount Eden prison for the Springbok tour riots. And his mother never understood why he was a protester, you know, why you do that for? Why you want to help the Māori? Why you want to do that? And she didn't realise until Tingi Hongi Nelson Mandela.
She saw him on TV with Nelson Mandela, and she must have said, "Oh, it must be all right then."
Yeah. So, yeah. So getting back to the book, that's when it came out in 2005. And then I also started teaching in my university course at University of Auckland, a course called Growing Up Ethnic in New Zealand. And so the Panther component was one where I started educating to liberate my students. And that has grown now hugely over the years. And now we do a Panthers rap in schools, educate to liberate. So there's about 25 schools all over Auckland and in Hamilton that we go to every year, and they have do a seminar workshop.
So you've been to Fraser College in Hamilton, and
yes,
you know, been there. That was an interesting experience, I have to say. Just getting away from the thick of it.
They go to we've got a page, the Polynesian Panther documentary page. So we post up all our Panthers rap stuff all around Auckland. So to us, that educate to liberate Panthers rap in schools is the revolution. That is the revolution, because we are changing the mindsets. We're conscientizing a whole generation of kids who aren't like millennials, who want to know their history. Excuse that, I just couldn't resist that. But so they're wanting to know their history, and that's the problem, because up to this point, they've just been fed the Disney version of our identities and our histories and who we are. And so it's this kind of educator liberating that the Panthers are involved in now. So that's part of it. Yeah, so that was the original book. This was the 2005 one. And yeah, the cover was like this because we wanted the kids to read it. You know what I mean? It's not an academic book. We wanted the kids to kind of relate to that. And then it got reprinted, which brought it further up to 86. And then we've got this lovely Dawn Reid book by Pauline Smith. And ever since this book's come out, primary schools have been asking us to go to their schools. Little, you know, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, and all wanting to be activists. And we always say, hang on, the best way to be an activist is to listen to your mum and tidy your room when you're supposed to.
We have to tell them that, you know, even revolutionaries have to wash the dishes. Even revolutionaries have to do the hours, you know. I think I have a personal version of this, but I'm pretty sure that other Polynesian Panthers have similar versions to this. Is that for us, every day, every single day was a challenge to try and be normal. Every single day was a challenge to try and overcome barriers that were put in our way, not necessarily by us. And we would see our parents coming back from work, the jobs they were in. These are people for whom English was not their first language, and the technology, most of it was unknown to them in their workplaces. They would come home, and I always wondered as a child, why were they so stressed, and what possibly could have happened to have them come home in the condition they were in. It wasn't until going to the workplaces and hearing these stories that I realised that each day they had been out there in this unfamiliar environment, and they were being ridiculed because they couldn't speak English well enough, or they said a word, pronounced a word with an accent, or they didn't know how to operate a piece of technology that was so unfamiliar with them. And they were ridiculed for this. And to me, it was no wonder they came back in that condition every day. And so with this constant presence of all of these small things, small moments around me, it was very, very easy to stay motivated, and try and make the changes that would help my parents and people like them in their generation, and to create pathways for our own people, ourselves and our own people now and in the future. So to us, there was no kind of self-doubt about what we had to do. There was no kind of time where we questioned what we were doing, even though at times we fell out in our relationships with our elders. There was no kind of thinking, second guessing, how would this be if we didn't do this, or how would this be if we did this. So there was none of that. It was so in your face, and it was so pressed hard against us that we just had to respond every day and not think about the alternative. Yes. That you're right.
Yeah. Just while you're waiting for questions, while you're thinking, I've just finished writing another book. It's hot off the press. It's going to be published in September, and it's called The Platform. the legacy of the Polynesian Panthers and in race relations in New Zealand. It's my own personal story of being a Panther and a New Zealand-born Samoan woman. And as I was thinking about writing this book, my ancestors came to me in my dreams and they said, "Where is your malu? Where is your malu?" And I would answer, my malu is, I wear mine on the inside. My malu is on the inside. But every time I would wake up and I'd have this thing in my head called, my malu is steel ink. My malu is steel ink. And so that became a metaphor for my whole life. So I realized that the cuts that and the pain that I went through as I was getting my malu was from the, you know, the tatau, who was life itself, who was making these marks on me. And the pain that I suffered was being filled. You know, the walls I've built around myself, the racism, everything, and my own personal family history. But the Panthers gave me the coping mechanism to break down those walls. And so the book is about how I got my malu through my life, and the steel ink is what I write about it in the chapters, and how the blood, when the blood came out and dried out, it was replaced by ink, which actually, and right at the end, there's a healing aspect as you wait for the malu, you know, and you celebrate it, and it's time to heal. And so that's the book. So it's published by BWB Books. So it's coming out in September. But it was an awesome, you know, when I read, to join the Panthers, we had to read Seize the Time by Bobby Seale. And when I read that book, I looked at the quite also misogyny in there with the black males towards the sisters and the Black Panthers. And when I read it, like, even in my 17-year-old skin, I said, wow, that's not like us in our Samoan families. Our mums and grands rule. You know, mum gave her pay packet to dad every week, and, you know, it was like, we've got a strong womanism in our Pacific women that I couldn't relate to when I was reading Seize the Time. And so that's what it was like being in the Panthers. You know, there was the whengainga, the brother-sister bond with the guys who were ex-gang members. Like, gosh, I was freaked out. You know, I went to the very first meeting. You know, can you imagine a bunch of these good church girls and these ex-gang members, you know, big afros and leather jackets, and well, they look really good, but, you know, we weren't there for that. But Will's talk about pushback, you know, it was his talk about we got to fix this, you know, we can't wait for anybody to help us. We have to do it ourselves. And man, did we do it. We just woke New Zealand up to what racism was. So, okay, have some questions now?
Yeah, I have, oh, sorry, one tick. I've just got to mute my other, hang on. Hi, sorry, just a few technical issues there. Thanks so much. This is such a privilege to have you guys join, and the book has been wonderful. I'm dialing in from Australia. So my name is Anae and I'm a Tongan Australian. And one of the things that absolutely blew my mind was just how progressive you guys were in terms of your awareness and your understanding of politics. And I say that because I really only sort of built my awareness around politics in sort of the last 5 to 6 years, and I'm 37. And I was just wanting to know what your thoughts were in terms of your observations of how our diasporic communities react to politics in this day and age, especially with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. In that, like, I feel like the whole world has only just sort of woken up to those issues, but those issues have been around forever. And then in terms of like our Pacifica people in how they deal with racism, I feel like that many of us are still quite asleep, and I think that's probably indicative of our privilege. Because I say that to myself, in that I have probably been quite late to the game because of my privilege. Of being raised and being born and raised in Australia. So I just wanted to obviously just commend your efforts in terms of what you guys did back in the 70s. I think it's amazing and so incredibly progressive, especially in the book where you guys were learning about politics in university, but not just learning about it, but you're actually putting a lot of these things into action and doing and going against a lot of our cultural and traditional, protocols of sort of challenging authority. So, sorry, that's a really long-winded statement, but I just wanted to, 1, make that observation, and 2, commend you on your efforts, and then 3, maybe just hear about what your thoughts are in terms of seeing our people now react to politics and racism.
Oh, can I just start, Elle?
Thank you.
You're right. They're just dead. They're dead in the water. There are no Pacific leaders revealing themselves the way we did in 1970. And we think about it as what's going on, But first of all, 3 of us in the Panthers are descendants of Tamasese, Lelofi Tamasese the third, who got shot by the New Zealand police in Beach Road, Apia. So the politics is there in our blood, as it were. But it's the knowing that something's not right, and then to fix it. And if that's politics, well, that's politics. That's what we felt. And when we were doing what we were doing, we didn't think about politics. We were just doing what needed to be done to make life for our people just all normal, not better than anyone else. Just we were living in terrible housing. It was just the pits. It was rat infested, and our boys were being picked over by the cops just for walking down Ponsonby Road, and it was terrible. And so that's what we did. And if that's being political, then what is wrong with Pacific people these days if they don't do that? But we can take heart to know that it's our next generation that will be the political ones, because we've all our message to the kids in schools is don't wait for Pacific politicians to do anything. They're not free to. They're tied by a political party. They can't do anything. They're tied. They're not independent, So we have to do it. And the way to do it is, if you're really passionate about something in your hood, then surround yourself with like-minded people and do something. It doesn't matter who they are, Polynesians, Maoris, whoever, but people in the same waka who believe and are ready to die for this change that you want to make. And that's what we tell these, it seems to be a fad now to be an activist, but we say, hey, if you want to be an activist, you have to be ready to lay down your life. And some of our Panthers won't talk about their time as a Panther because it was bad. They went through really bad times. We had gangs trying to come into Ponsonby and challenge, the hood, and so the gang stuff was there all the time. So we had a military wing. We had to have a military wing to protect ourselves. And we used them in the Springbok tours and the other protest movements. We had the TAB, the Tenants Aid Brigade, to stand up to these scrupulous landlords who tried to evict our people from really bad housing. Oh my gosh, it was, you know, we had the knee on our necks in the 1950s, 60s. Honestly, that's all how I can say it. And the Panthers had that platform, which the Black Lives Matter, it's exactly the same. They say, you know, passive resistance to racism. Well, that was our first point and our 3-point.
Yeah.
You know, way back then in the 1970s. That's why New Zealand leads the world, I think. And if there's any country that can stamp out racism, it'll be New Zealand. Because we dealt with it, 50 years of it, you know. So all the gains that we've made, it's not perfect. We don't live in a perfect society. Racism will never go away. Racism, but it will if everybody says, just stand up, name it, name the beast for what it is, and stand up. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge our Australian connection. Actually,
Yes.
very early in our activity, we formed a link with the Aboriginal rights movements in Australia, and actually Melani, that's a whole other story, but she had this box of material that was sent to her after she communicated with the Black Panther Party in America when she was there. A box of resources turns up at our office. So Will takes that box of resources to Australia to support Dennis Walker and the Australian Aboriginal rights movement, and helping them set up their first Aboriginal embassy in Canberra.
And he got arrested.
It was just a tent embassy, but that was us as well. We were there standing with him. So that's our whakapapa to them, to the people of Australia, the First Nations people of Australia. And coming back to Aotearoa, our people were invisible, politically invisible. We were not a political priority or an economic, we're only an economic priority in as much as we were units of productivity for the assembly lines and for the menial jobs that nobody else in New Zealand wanted to do. We're only visible in that sense. But politically and culturally, we were invisible until we came along. And we gave our people, our community, a voice and an agency. And our voice was so loud and so clear that the political parties in New Zealand, the government, could not anymore ignore the injustices that were being done to us. They could no longer ignore the racism that is so embedded in this country, in this country's history. We couldn't ignore that anymore. And then when we look at the swirl of global events that are recalling how many Black lives have been lost, innocent Black lives being lost through police brutality and through the racism of the wider community. And we see, not just in America, but all over the world, people are re-examining their own history. In a sense, their colonial history has caught up with them, and they don't like what they see. The important thing is that they don't just not like what they see, they want to actually do something about it. And that movement is global. And I guess you'll probably see the end of racism when we see the end of colonisation. So we have found ourselves from our own experience that relying on a government that's based on colonial values is not going to get us what we want. If we're expecting the change from the top down, that's not going to happen. Our experience has always been grassroots is where the change happens. It's the agency, individual agency, and a community of people, agents for change, where that happens. Often the government is unaware of the nuances of its own country, such as the cultural, ethnic, political nuances of which we are a part. They don't hurt us, or maybe they do, but we have to make it clear to them that these are our needs, and if you're not going to help us to achieve those, fulfill those needs, we'll do it ourselves. And as Panthers, that's what we do. We make access to legal resources available, access to healthy homes available, access to fair treatment. One thing we're doing was it woke our people, woke up the elders of our communities. We were already active for 5 years before the Dawn Raids. We'd already been fighting racism and the injustices that were being done to our people. And during that time, they wouldn't listen to us because none of us were matais, none of us were adults, none of us were graduates from the university. We didn't have the kind of the pedigree that gets people to listen to you. And we were regarded as moi bees, pretty much, bedwetters in Samoa, and just noisy. But then when the Dawn Raids happened, everything that we've been saying up to that point, suddenly the scales drop from the elders' eyes and they see what we've been seeing. They hear what we've been hearing. And in that time, they themselves start to form their own response to the Dawn Raids. And we get people even today who come up and tap us on the shoulder. And these are elders and say thank you for what you did back then. These are the people that wouldn't cross the road to spit on us back in the day, but now they come up and say thank you, and we're just grateful for that. And going back to that earlier question, I think Kailani was asking or mentioned that imposter syndrome. We're listening to everything that the youth are saying about what we did back in the day, and we ourselves look back at that and we can't believe ourselves that we did that. And so you know, it's almost gone full circle now, where the people who if they didn't support us, they would helping us anyway, but now they're coming back and saying and seeing what we did. And it's very humbling, especially for our elders to say back to us. Yeah.
But it was hard for them. Their whole focus was on settling in a new land. Yeah. You know, they were busy working, they weren't home, they were trying to put food on the table. So we knew it was up to us, you know, because our parents were busy working and looking after the families. So there was no one else. But, you know, we had the ear of the mayor. We walked into his office. We said, there's no space for the young people to congregate or have, you know, we want this. We want a headquarters in Ponsonby. You know, we want a youth hall somewhere else, and we'd go on marches. So we'd have spaces for the kids to sit, you know, to the homework centres, for example, we set up. It was amazing. We went to a school, St. Cuthbert's College, to give our Panther talk. And the principal of St. Cuthbert's College was one of the teachers that used to help our kids at the homework centres. Oh my gosh, it's just amazing. But yeah, I think at the time it's happening because racism is in your face again. You know, for 50 years it's become dormant. So it's like, it's there, but it's institutionalized racism. It wasn't in your face like it was in the 70s. But now, since you know what happened in America, everyone is sick of it. Everyone is just had enough. say stop. And that's how we felt in the 1970s when we were stopping the New Zealand system from, you know, we were filling the gaps that the government couldn't provide in their policies and their service deliveries. You know.
Yeah, because it was a Eurocentric policies.
One shoe fits all.
Yeah, government based on the Westminster system in England, and the Crown was still, you know, the Queen was still the pin-up girl, and still is. In terms of that reconciliation, within our own community, there's a lot of reconciliation that has to happen as well before we can reconcile with the larger political powers. But it has to take place, I think, within our own community first, because there was a lot of, as we may have mentioned before, the elders were not particularly quick to respond. And the other thing too was the civic people that were in the police force, they were often pitted against their own people, as you point out. I have had two brothers who were policemen at the time.
And was Panther.
And one of them was a former Panther before he became a policeman. And there was racism within the police force as well. And it expressed itself in terms of whenever there was a Pacific or Māori issue, they'd send the Pacific and Māori people, police officers, to confront them. So Bastion Point, it was the Māori and Pacific people, police officers who were the front line. Every colour of beige was in that front line. Same as the Springbok tour. Who were the policemen at the front line? You saw the brown people. And other occasions where large numbers of Māori and Pacific people gathered, they sent the brown faces in police uniforms. But the police, within their own internal organisation, are experiencing racism there as well. So that healing has to happen between the community and the police. That reconciliation has to happen there. Because it was brother against brother, brother against cousin, or cousin against cousin. It was like that. So that has to happen at that level. Then in the larger picture, we are at the moment making submissions to the government for that official apology for the Dawn Rays to be made. And we're hoping that within the next year or 18 months, that petition is going to be answered. Yeah.
Regarding the second question, getting politically active in Samoa or in your Pacific or in Tonga, that's interesting because Samoa's had the same ruling party for the last, 30 years? So what's interesting though is where does power exist in our Pacific? So I've been doing some research about the Whaamatei, transnational Whaamatei, the chiefs who live out of Samoa and the Whaasamoa out of Samoa. And some of the data I'm getting is really interesting in terms of it's actually us, the Samoans i whako outside of Samoa who are developing Samoa. It's not aid, it's not our exports, it's us as our remittances. There's 5 streams: the remittances, the sauwhai, bestowal ceremonies, the tourist dock, the tourists, we're the tourists, it's not Palanese that are, it's us coming back to Samoa. And the 4th one is the reunions and funerals. So when you add that up, there's billions of dollars, billions going back to Samoa through those cash flows. So why don't we have a political say in the elections? Why don't it's our blood, sweat and tears and our tautua, our servant to our villages and our ainga back in Samoa. We're doing that very well. But, you know, the Prime Minister treats us like, yeah, my memories.
We're invisible.
We're invisible. You know, we're invisible. And so that's very Samoan. So I think that politically, Samoans and Samoa haven't got a political bone. They can't afford to be. They live in a small place, you know, the families. So it's very hard for them to buck the system back in the villages. And for Tonga, well, you can see how hard it was for Tonga to, well, I don't agree that that democracy is the answer for Tonga, to be honest. You know, I tell my students, I said, well, if you take the dynasties, Tonga and the Kanapolo dynasties out of Tonga, you won't be Tongan anymore. And you become these democratic what? You know, what is democracy? It doesn't exist anywhere in this globe. It's just in your head. But anyway, I hope that answers your questions, your two questions.
There is a, like Melani pointed out, in Samoa, the ruling party's been there for 30 years. And lately with the proposed changes that they want to make to the Samoan constitution, and they're intimating that that's going to make Samoan politics more Samoan. Well, I'm not too sure about that, but there are groups that are that have New Zealand, New Zealand affiliations. There's political parties that have New Zealand affiliations that are setting up in Samoa, and that is a form of activism to resist the constitutional changes and to try and effect a worthy opposition and provide a kind of a watchdog on the government, which it has never had over the last 30 years. So there is that sense in which there is already a political activism afoot, and I guess the strongest political statement that can ever be made in Samoa is when the villagers themselves speak up, and when the pule from each of the villages speak out, and that's already happening during this so-called consultation process in Samoa over those changes. But still, each of the islands that we come from here on this Zoom have all experienced some form of colonialism in some shape or some form. So we're all in some way marked by that. And so we are not strangers to colonialism and the impact that it's had on our people. And so, it's probably for us to try and bring about the changes within our own island nations to dissolve or dismantle the colonial structures that keep producing the things that are not healthy for our people. And even here in New Zealand, we need to start looking at not a post-colonial thing, but a decolonisation of the systems here, and putting the indigenous people here, give them their sovereignty, is what they've been asking for over 100 years. And they just get piecemeal responses from the government. And so I think until they have what is theirs, what is their own sovereignty, that we have to support them in that. So around the Pacific, I think we're all starting in different ways to re-examine the impact of the colonial foundations upon which our governments and economies are built on.
So you can be a Panther just by being radical, but if you're in a group and just using that 3-point, annihilate racism, celebrate your identity, and educate to liberate. And that answers your first question was, when I went to university, being political and everything, university for me was the most empowering experience. you go as a young kid, you've got angst, you've got bitterness, you've got anger about a lot of things. But what going to university did was give me the education to say, hey, it's not me, it's society. It's capitalism. It's all these, you know, you learn, and it's so empowering because it takes away the bitterness and it makes you say, I get it now, I know what I have to do. So what you're talking about is important. And the book will never get outdated because A, there'll always be racism in the world where there are differential power, you know, structures, right? And secondly, because we're so global, identity, ethnic identity is crucial. If you don't know your roots, like Bob Marley says, you ain't no one. You've got to know your roots. And for me, it's trying to explain those of us born in the diaspora and transnational spaces that we have a valid identity. Our identity as Australian born or American born or New Zealand born are valid. That is a valid Pacific Island identity. So be proud of it, and you know, and learn about the history of those communities in your place, in your country. And so, you know, in my class, I get the kids who say, oh, they've had stigmas of being called plastic Samoan, and you know, what sort of a Samoan are you if you can't speak the language? Those sorts of things. And they leave this class empowered because I teach them about ethnicity theory and, you know, Western theories and Pacific ethnicity theories, and I get them to work out who they are. And it's so important and empowered because I said, look, I don't want you living your whole life trying to figure out who you are. There's too much work to be done. There's too much work to looking after our families and communities. Get over it.
Quick question.
And so what I say is that the Whaasamoa that our parents brought with them from the islands is what they have taught us. It's not the same what they're doing in the islands, right? It's in their heads. It's what they learned and used as they were growing up. So already you've got the differing layers of what Whaasamoa is. But it is all valid, no matter if it's the Whaasamoa in Samoa, which is different from the Whaasamoa in New Zealand, which is different from the one in America and in Australia. There are the linking values. It's our values of Tautu and Whawalo that remain the same. But how we do those things are different, right? So your second question was about, to me, there is a correlation between ethnic identity and identity confusion, which leads to well-being. So a lot of these young kids are trying to work out who their family is, who they are, their ethnic identity. And they're not sick. They're just wondering who their identity, who they are. And so they find solutions in all these gangs and maybe think about suicide. But so I think that that's where the answer lies. It's looking at the relationship between ethnic identity and well-being. There are positives in that and negatives, but that's what I talk about in that book that's coming out in the platform. The healing thing is what I call Pacific empowerment, and it's in identity work, you know, working out who you are. So the thesis that I wrote, which you can get on internet, was meant to be a shortcut for you guys. It took my whole life to work that out, but I wanted to give you guys a shortcut so you can work it out and then do the work that we have to, you know, to fight against all these injustices. So work it out and then go and do the work. Don't spend too much time, you know, but for those who are out there who are struggling, that's where we should be directing our energies towards. And so that's why I say Pacific empowerment is knowing our own histories and knowing where we came from. And a lot of the millennials think they're so privileged that, you know, they don't need to know the history. It just starts from them. That's their history. That's all they want to know. And it's not their fault. That's how society has shaped that generation. So when you put it into perspective like that, you know what needs to be done. You just just stand up and just demand knowing our own histories, our own stories, not the Disney versions that are out there, our own stories told by us, for us, and by us. Oh, and by Palangis that know who we are. You know, I'm not saying that we only us know us. Come on, you know, you've got so it's a human thing that you know people who have you know the humility and the humbleness and the empathy to help. So yeah, don't yeah, your turn.
Well, I'm just I think one of the most important lessons that I learned as a 15-year-old, and I think it's the lesson that you know most 15-year-olds would benefit from hearing at this time. Why I say it's the most important lesson that I learned was because I was one of those ones that was teetering on two options: either just committing myself into the care of you know child services or whatever it was called then, or else just going and suiciding myself. Until I realised that you know that what I really wanted was just to understand who I was, my history, and my culture. I had no idea about what any of that was. And so in the book, I explain that in the book, that I just lost and stuck and didn't know what to do. And it was only through my involvement and engagement with the Panthers where I heard that thing, Mana Pacifica, be proud of who you are. And that's a journey. That's actually a journey. It's not just something you can read about. And sometimes it's a painful journey because you're going to be talking to people who you never talked to before, and yet they're your loved ones. Say you're ainga, they're your whānau. You never talked to them before, but now you are. You're talking to your parents in a way that you never talked before. And that's the journey of that's what Mana Pacifica means, is that journey into yourself, into your culture. And then, you know, like today, I'm grateful that I heard those words of wisdom, that I heard those words of wonder, because that really just saved my life. It really did. You know, I think of the Polynesian Panther Party members who today, they don't want to recall their time in the Panthers because of their experience in the Panthers. And today, I suppose we call that PTSD. I think the Samoan word for that is musu, or something like that. But you know, there's no kind of category for that behaviour in our culture. But what I realised was that for a lot of our young Pacific people, ones who are still in school now, they're growing up and you know, they've got all the support around them that in the world just about. More support than we would even have been able to dream about. They have that now. And we still have the highest rate of youth suicide in the world. In our own experience, in my own experience, I found that the traditional methods of resolving things were not working. They just weren't working. I couldn't, for example, go to my dad and you know, just say, "Oh, Dad, you know, I feel like I'm you know, I'm not very safe at the moment." I don't think he would understand what they need. But then he'd be thinking, "Oh, you need to go and see the Fofo," or something like this. You know, traditional ways of resolving those things were not working because we're in a different world, you know, a very different world. And then we look at what the Western world has to offer us, and they see mental health as just, we'll give you a chemical treatment for this, or medicalise you. You know, we'll medicalise you. They can't see that we are more than just a physical thing, that we have multiple dimensions. We have our spirituality. We have our own mental worldview. We have our own psychology, etc. But to me, the greatest thing that I find is missing, or which needs to be recovered, is our own spirituality. Never mind this Judeo-Christian. If you want to follow that, by all means, go for it.
It's different.
Go and do that. But understand that you had your own spirituality before the missionaries came. And when you take that whole dimension away from people who have had that dimension, and that dimension has given them life and meaning and bearing in the world, once you take that dimension away, you're lost. You can't find your space because you just can't find it. And I have to admit that, you know, it's not even a confession, but I've been trained and ordained actually as a minister at a Presbyterian church in New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand. What I'm trying to do at the moment is look from a theological point of view into our own Pacific spirituality, and just ignoring religion. It's not religion, it's spirituality. When you can stand on the earth and you know this is your second mother, this is your second mother, how are you going to treat your second mother? How are you going to treat your mother? You're going to spit on your mother? You're going to throw rubbish on your mother? This sort of thing, you know, that kind of, and it's not just that, it's being connected to that as well. It's being connected to the whenua. Wherever your pito is buried, wherever your whenua is, you are that. And there's that great poem, you know, we're not, what was that? We are the Pacific Ocean. We are the island.
We don't have land. We are the land.
We are the land.
We don't have the sea. We are the sea.
We're the ocean. We're all of that. And that's what I'm hoping to recover, is that sense of spirituality that keeps us on an even keel, that enables us to sail safely towards the things that would harm us, and to do so safely. These are the things that I think the direction in which Pacific and Indigenous mental health need to be looking towards, and recovering those things.
It's really good.
Thank you, Alec.
I've always taught the students that everything has a vantage point. There is no such thing as truth, one truth. Everyone has a vantage point. So our job is to know what those vantage points are. So it's like the wha Samoa that my parents brought with them. That's what I'm proud of. I'm not going to define it because no one, it's unique to each person and each family. So when I stand up, if you can't speak Samoan, well, stuff it. I'm proud to be Samoan because I was brought up Samoan by my Samoan parents. Full stop. No need to explain any more. Justify yourself. Because the wha Samoa that they had in their heads, you know, not trying to be that Samoan and Samoa. In fact, they're becoming more colonized than us. The Samoans and Samoa have just been they're drowning in the white multi-corporation, you know, the feminist movements of, you know, equity for women, and so they're buying into it. Whereas we, whafo, we've got a more critical eye because we're living with the enemy, as it were. But, you know, it's like, so that's what I mean about vantage point. So if you self-identify in a certain way, be proud of it. You know how you got there. You know what the journey was for you. And just state it. And so people, it's like I tell my students, when you read something, an article or a book, you know, I used to think that was the truth when I was at uni way back, you know. I thought, oh, well, they're clever, they know what they're saying. But you've got to look at their vantage point. Are they coming at it from a historical view? Is it an anthropological view or an idiot's view? You know, you've got to know that so you can be critical and understand where they're coming from. So when you get up and talk, you've got to be the same. Show your vantage point. and stuff anyone else, because only you know what you mean by those terms, but you have to redefine it your way. So it's a process of deconstructing and reconstructing. But Palangis in the postmodern movement just deconstruct, full stop. But we being Indigenous people, we're holistic. You know, we can't just dish something. You've got to come up with something else or shape it, transform it into something that you can live with in your culture and your identity.
Lucky, I have connections to Amauli in Pango, Tutuila. Yeah, that's my village of my mother. It's a beautiful village. You're in a beautiful place. I'm reminded of this story of these things. 11 blind people. It could be any number really. They all go out and there's an elephant out there, and they all go out and they're asked to come back. When they come back, and they're asked to describe what the elephant is like. So they start describing only the part of the elephant that they touched. So they said, oh, well, the elephant's got like cabbage, is cabbage ears. Another one comes back, oh, well, the elephant's, an elephant is like, got a long trunk-like thing that's very soft and it's like a vacuum cleaner. So they all come back with these different, like Melani was saying, vantage points, but it was all from the same beast. It was all from the same beast. So isn't it what we're talking about? Are not the differences arising from the same source? And I guess it's for us to decide, what is that source and what part of the beast are we touching? And then how can then we talk about the beast and not about the little part that we were touching, if you know what I mean.
It's being holistic, you know, and people, you know, the Whaasamoa in my research, gosh, you know, you've got 10 people, they've got 10 different definitions of what Whaasamoa is, but it's all valid, right? So it's, you just have to take it for what it is, and not think that anything is set in concrete, because culture changes, language changes. But, you know, our job as students is to work out, well, what stays the same and what changes, because then you'd have a better understanding of what's going on. But it's the little things. That's what we were talking about before, you know, the little things that you do are greater than the sum of their parts. It's the little things that we did as Panthers that have become huge, you know, but it's how you act in your own space with your own family. It's conscientizing. That's my my supervisor said, Melani, there's no such word as conscientizing. I said, yes, there is. So, you know, it's sort of conscientizing, making people aware, shining the light on things that they weren't aware of, because a lot of these races are just ignorant. They just don't know what they don't know. We used to go and give concerts to old Palangi, old people's homes way back, because we had to try and conscientize that lot as well, that we weren't just these savages or criminals that they saw in the media all the time. You know, we used to just do performances, and then they'd come and say, oh, you speak English. They just don't know what they don't know. And so it's conscientizing, but we had to conscientize to 3 layers of people: tangata whenua, First Nations, and then the Parangi, and then our own people. And it was hard, but it's the small things that you do. So just the other day, there was headlines that there was some violence between different school kids, PIs, Polynesians from the secondary schools. Next minute, we see there's this protest at Otahu, and there was a whole lot of these students from all these South Auckland schools who marched against violence. And it was funny, it was like they're our little slaves, because at the schools we say, look at your hood, find out what you don't like about it, the injustices that are happening in your hood, and then surround yourself with like-minded people and do something, You know what Lucky was saying, it's not good enough talking, let's talk about it. We have to do, and you know, PIs are known for their, you know, walking the talk. So if you're in a crowd that talks a lot, get rid of them. Just talks. Do something. So that's you know, and one of the placards in the march was, only the hood can fix the hood. You know, only the hood can fix the hood. So they were making a stand that they're going to not stand for this anymore. So stop it.
There was a particular intersection in our community which was claiming the lives of young people because there was no traffic management there at all. So we just bowled down to the city council and said, listen, our people are dying on that pedestrian crossing. We need to have traffic safety, put up some traffic lights there. Within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the traffic lights were there and nobody was getting killed. Well, but we had to protest about that, and we just formed this continuous line, crossing the road continuously. It was very legal. Nobody could do anything about it, but the traffic was backing up. And then we were asked, why are we doing this? Well, because our people are dying on this crossing. So it's those small actions, those small movements that create a bigger movement. So if there's anything in your hood that you're not happy with, like for example, when we're talking to the kids from South Auckland, we say, listen, some of the things you want to look at is we've got a high rate of obesity, we've got a high rate of diabetes, and you look in your hood, how many fast foods places is there in your hood? How many cheap liquor outlets are there in your hood? How about getting rid of some of them? Recently we heard that one South Auckland community has banded together and said, we're not having KFC in our neighbourhood. So there's no KFC there anymore. So now if you want KFC, you've got to go like nearly 2 suburbs away to get it. So there's that kind of thing. Looking out for our health, it's just hidden in plain sight, these things. Fast food, alcohol. What else is there in our hood that's damaging our people? Let's change that.
That you're decolonising when you do that.
Yeah. So it's from those small movements, really. And that's our advice. And it seems to me to be like the 60s and the 70s kind of activism, get out there and march. I mean, it's a different sort of thing now. You have the power of the internet, you have the power of social media. And I had to chuckle to myself during this COVID thing. There was like 18,000 people in Spain. They all hit the internet, social media, and they organised a rent strike over social media. Don't pay your rent because it's unfair, it's unjust. How can we work while we're in COVID? And you might want to look at how many Pacific workers are actually essential workers and risking it every day. How do we support them? And why is it that they're doing it? These kinds of questions appear. Yeah. So those small movements is the way to go about it.
Making people think. Like I have, being at university, so many New Zealand-born Samoans coming into my office and saying, oh, our Samoan males are sexist. I said, pardon? Oh, our Samoan men, they're very sexist. And I say to them, have you heard of the whengainga? They go, no. I said, well, go away, learn about it, read about it, and then come back, we'll talk. You know, and so it's trying to think of one of our ancestors' ancient wisdoms every day and teaching our kids that. You know, so it's going back to the whengainga, which is, you know, the most strongest gender bond in the Whaasamoa is the brother-sister, full stop. And their kids, their generations, their ngapas, and there's relationships, you know, the vā, there's the vā that we have to look after, oh, you know, at a whole lot of levels. But once they start to understand that, they know it can have effect for our policy. Because, for example, domestic violence, you know, what does the Palangi do? Makes the father stay away from his kids, and he's not allowed near the house. And it costs us taxpayers thousands of dollars for that. and it doesn't work. 9 times out of 10, it'll end up in disaster, you know. And I says, all you need to do is throw that guy into a room with his mum and his sisters. That's all they need to do, you know. And that's our way. That's the cultural references are so valid, especially today. Looking back into our cultural mesina, you know, and try and apply it to today's living, because that's what they are. They are survival strategies. Our ancient wisdoms are survival strategies. They're not dumb, our ancestors. They knew what we would need for our survival, no matter what comes at us, whether it's capitalism, whether it's Christianity, whether it's colonialism, you know? And that's what's the body. Our body is there, but we wear different coats, which are, you know, forced upon us, but our body is still there.
I'll just say one thing that's pretty easy for everyone to do, or I imagine it would be, is just to do at least every day, just do one thing that honours your ancestry, one thing that honours your culture, one thing that honours your mana Pasifika. Just one thing. It's one thing, simple, small thing, but
honours your mother,
honours your parents, honours your culture, your community. And I think you'll start to see changes around you when you start doing that, because people will say, why are you doing that? Well, this is why I'm doing it. You know, there you go. Yeah, the story begins.
Yeah, just one more comment for Lucky. I'm supervising a PhD thesis at the moment of a Tongan lady who's, you know, decolonizing that whole LGBTQ, whatever it is, you know, in terms of ancient mythology and teachings and that. So, yeah, he's doing really well, and a lot of students, even theology students, are decolonizing Christianity, you know. But the thing is, for them, they go back to Samoa and become whaiwhiaus, and all that criticality and knowledge just doesn't work. But, you know, it's there, our thinking, we're still strong in our thinking about changing and the valuing of our cultural mesina, you know. And that's what we have to teach our kids, how they have validity today. And we're lucky because we've got Pacific Studies at our university, so our kids are coming through that. But maybe if those of you who are attached to an educational unit, have those classes. You know, oh, that's it. At the moment in New Zealand, we have these cultural enhancement programs, right? Learn to dance, sing, perform, blah, 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 but we need ethnic enhancements, right? So, right, the ethnic enhancements is learning about colonial history and the history of our people. So the ethnic enhancement will make them a whole person. We're not just performing robots, jeepers, you know? There's the ethnic knowledge that we need to bolster that. So that's what I'm pushing in our schools and our educators, that we need more ethnic enhancement. And on that note, in 2022, Pacific and New Zealand history are going to be compulsory in New Zealand schools.